solve the problem. Maybe not, though. Welcome back. We've live on Channel 5, or also live on My 5. Daisy and Henry are with me. And later, we're asking if parents are wrong to use their smartphones around their children. But now it's your chance to call the doctor. Dr. Phillipa Kaye is here to answer your questions relating to the menopause. Are you currently going through it, or are you wondering how you can support a loved one who is going through it themselves? Get your calls in now. You could speak to Phillipa. 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Now, Phillipa is going to be chatting to us in just a moment. But Daisy, your experiences, because when we spoke to you earlier, you know, there's something that you can say about menopause.
Well, obviously, being 39, I'm much too young to have gone through. No, I'm 51, so I'm absolutely, you know, the standard age. And I hate to sound smug, but I've breezed through it. Now, I know, but I have, I mean, lots and lots of friends that have had hideous problems. And I have a WhatsApp group with about 30 of my girlfriends. And I looked it up this morning. We have had 137 conversations about the menopause in the last couple of years. So this is something I'm well versed in. But I'm one of the lucky ones, incredibly lucky, really. I haven't had, you know, I've gone right through the other end. I've never even been to the doctor about it. But, you know, I think I'm quite unusual. Well, Phillipa, you tell me, am I usual or unusual?
So about a quarter of women will have no symptoms at all. And of that remaining 3/4, about half of them will have some symptoms, and they might be debilitating. But for about a quarter of women, those symptoms really impact on their quality of life. So I think it's really important to share stories like yours so that women can go, oh, actually, it might be okay.
It doesn't have
to
be
It might be okay. And if it's not okay, there are things that we can do.
Now, Henry, well, look, this is really important. What's your experience been? Because, of course, it relates to, you don't have to be going through the menopause yourself to be affected by the menopause.
Well, your significant other is maybe in midlife, and you, as the partner, you can be hugely affected, especially if you don't breathe through it like Daisy McAndrew, and you have the night sweats, the highly irregular menstrual cycle, heavy bleeding, then nothing for months, brain fog, irritability, all the things that really test a relationship. And you, as a guy, have got to say, how do I kind of deal with this? You know, I want to be modern. I want to triangulate. I want to try to understand. I don't want to be one of these horrible men who just shuts down and doesn't want to know. And it's also difficult trying to distinguish what is you and what is this ogre, this beast that's trying to drive a wedge between us. And so I did some research. And I went off and got her progesterone and all these other things. Lots of things ending in own.
Yes,
from the chemist. And then think about diet and without mansplaining, because obviously as a guy in midlife who feels that he's in tune with his feminine side, you want to mansplain as well, and you shouldn't. And you just have to let it be and let her deal with it, but you support her.
Well, look, let's throw the phone lines open because people already have questions. Let's speak to Yvonne in London. Yvonne, I think we've lost Yvonne for just a moment. We'll try and get Yvonne back. Let's just talk about some of the what one would expect if you are going to go and through menopause. What are we talking about? People have heard of the hot flushes. Tell us a little bit more about the classic symptoms that people are expected to experience.
The menopause means the last period. And it's what we would call a diagnosis of retrospect. You can't say that you have been through the menopause until you haven't had a period for 12 months. But just as we have a medical word for the first period, but puberty took you a number of years and starting your period was one point in that. So we have the perimenopause, which is the lead up to that last period. And during that time, you might have symptoms. And physical symptoms, the most common, the most famous is the hot flush, the night sweat. But it also can be joint pains, headaches, itchy skin, insomnia, loss of libido, feeling exhausted. And some of the mental health symptoms can be things like depression, anxiety, irritability, worse PMS. You might actually have terrible flooding periods. You might have very irregular periods. There are tens and tens and tens of symptoms which can be related to the perimenopause.
And friends of mine, quite a few of them have had tinnitus, you know, ringing in the ears. A lot of them have had dry mouth. A lot of them have had terrible, you know, anxiety. Some of them had suicidal thoughts. You know, I mean, and the trouble is, I think, particularly because we don't tend to think of ourselves as menopausal. We just think of yourself as a person, a woman. So when you have it going through these things, a lot of my friends didn't click for ages, and their GPs didn't click either if they did go to their doctor that it was menopause.
OK, let's hear from people at home. Rashida in Birmingham. Rashida, welcome to the show. What would you like to ask the doctor?
Good afternoon to you all. Right, I don't think it's much about asking as it is about what I went through myself. So I had a total hysterectomy 9 years ago, and nothing was explained, thrown in the deep end. So, I mean, I would just say, Wilfred made a comment earlier, which is very, very offensive, I think. I think it should be taught in school as well. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, the effects of it are, as one of your previous, the lady said, that it is effective psychologically, physically, in every aspect.
Sure. Rashida, I'm trying to find out, what did you find very offensive?
When Wilfred said it's too much earlier on.
Oh, I see. Earlier on, when I spoke about it with Jeremy, yes, yes. He felt that perhaps, well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I understand what you mean. But for people who are wondering what on earth, this was before on Jeremy Vine's show where Wilfred Emmanuel Jones was giving us his thoughts on the menopause. Rashida, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Let's speak to Linda in Coventry. Linda, good afternoon. What would you like to ask the doctor?
Hello, good afternoon. So I just turned 40. My period has shortened, and then I keep getting hot and cold at the same time. It's like, is it normal? Is it premenopausal, or I don't know, I'm confused.
So your periods can do all kinds of things, actually, as you come up to the menopause. And actually, it's pretty common that they get slightly closer together, so that they come a bit more frequently. And they might last longer, they might be really, really heavy, they might be flooding. So yes, it can be. And different, the average age for Caucasian women in the UK to go through the menopause is 51. But actually, for black women, it's a few years earlier. And you might have symptoms for a decade before that. Oh. So if you're 40, yes, it's possible. And we also have to remember that you can have what we call POI, primary ovarian insufficiency, or an earlier menopause, and that's about 1 in 100 women under the age of 40. And if we have 1 in 100 under 40 having their final period, they're going to be having symptoms even before that. So if you're struggling, it's time to go to the doctor.
We need to send Mother Nature to diversity training.
Right.
Well, discrimination here.
So the age can be, you said 51, that can vary a lot, can't it? Because I've spoken to women who are in their late 30s and they seem to be perimenopausal.
So that is the average age for the final period. We must do a lot more research into people from BAME backgrounds. There isn't the research to say what it is in different groups and see if there are differences. But yes, 1 in 20 under 45, 1 in 100 under 40, 1 in 1,000 under 30. So it is something which is happening to different people at different ages. So we've got to be aware of it the whole time. OK, let's speak to Melanie, who's called in from Cardiff. Melanie, welcome to the show. Good afternoon. What would you like to ask the doctor?
Hello there. Hello, everyone. I am 51. I feel I'm in the menopause and I've been on HRT for 4 years. I'm doing quite an intensive degree at the moment and I feel that I need that support, although I still have a few symptoms. I'm just wondering, when I stop HRT, have I just delayed the onset of the even worse symptoms? When I stop HRT, will I suddenly have a barrage of symptoms that I'll find even more difficult to cope with because I'll be that much older?
That's a really great question and a common question. So the menopause is a moment in time. That is your last period. And being on HRT doesn't delay that. It doesn't affect that. What it does is it treats your symptoms as opposed to changing the timing of that last period. Now, if you're on a very high dose of HRT and then you stop it the next day, your body will respond to that drop in level of estrogen. And so what we often would recommend is that we might wean down the dose so that you can see whether or not you can manage, whether you have symptoms or whether or not they're manageable, and when we can go up and down as you need to. But if you're on a very high dose and you suddenly stop, yes, you might suddenly feel, oh, I've got all those back again. But if you wean it down, often not, because the symptoms of the menopause don't last forever in everybody. For some people, they last a long time after the menopause, but in other people, they don't. And so it will vary person to person.
I think Melanie's question is so interesting because not just with the menopause, but with a lot of medical situations or conditions, there is still, amongst some of us, this idea that taking any sort of medication is sort of a sign of weakness and that we need to just battle on with whatever it is. And that, if you've stubbed your toe, don't take a painkiller, just deal with the pain. If you've got the menopause, don't take HRT, just deal with it and get through it. And of course, that's not necessarily good advice, but it's something that's sort of, I bet it's particularly British, that sort of British stiff upper lip attitude.
No, carry on through.
Carry on limping through. And actually, I wish we could all slightly get over that attitude and just say, if you need it, take it.
I also think it's part of what we are told as being a woman. We are told that to be a woman is to be in pain. Period pain, labour pain, issues with breastfeeding. We are told that these are things that we have to put up with. And I'm often asked, how do I know if I'm bad enough to see the doctor? And I say, when it bothers you, it's time to bother me.
We've talked a lot, very quickly, we've talked a lot about HRT and the medicalisation, as it were, the medical treatment for, menopause. But are there food, natural products that you can be taking as well as, or if not, instead of HRT, that can really help you deal with some of those symptoms?
Medicine should never be either or. It shouldn't be lifestyle or medicine. It's always got to be both of those together. And absolutely, exercise makes a difference to hot flushes and insomnia and fatigue and, and your mental health symptoms related into the menopause. Cutting out caffeine, cutting out alcohol, having a healthy diet, all of those things can make a big difference. The evidence around supplements and herbal supplements is mixed, but we also have to remember that we have non-hormonal treatments for the menopause as well. So if you don't want to have HRT or you can't have HRT, and there are reasons why you might not be able to, we have other treatments too. And really importantly, treatments such as CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, talking therapy, are evidence-based for the management of the menopause.
Let's take a couple more of your questions. Dawn says, I'm finding the menopause so much better than 8 horrific years of perimenopause. My symptoms are now minimal, but I seem to be allergic to many things which I wasn't before. And I've been diagnosed with asthma. Is this related to menopause?
Possibly. We have receptors for estrogen from the hair on our head to the skin of our feet. It affects every single body system, including the respiratory system. And yes, some people will have more allergies or they have something called histamine intolerance, and that can be related to the menopause. But the other thing that Dawn said, which was interesting there, is that her perimenopause was worse and now she's feeling better. And for some people, they have symptoms in the decade before and then their symptoms rapidly improve after. And in other people, it's just a few years before, but it takes a longer time to tail off. And we also need to remember that there are some long-term things that can occur after the menopause due to us not being exposed to estrogen anymore. And so whilst you might not have hot flushes at the time, you still increase your risk of osteoporosis later in life. And so we need to think about it not just around your 40s and 50s.
OK, let's take another call. Dimpner is called from West Sussex. Dimpner, welcome to the show. What would you like to ask the doctor?
Good morning, everyone. I went through my menopause very similar to one of your guests. Hardly noticed. It was a flicker. That was in my 50s. I'm now 63. And over the last couple of years, it feels like the menopause has returned. So I have been to see my nurse at the practice. She has put me on low levels of hormones. But I must admit, I am still struggling, particularly with flat moods, joint pain, poor sleep, periods of anxiety and depression. And I just wondered if this was a common occurrence as you go later in life, because women, it feels for me as a woman, symptoms never go away because they're very hormonal. So I just wondered if the doctor could advise me, really.
Often when people come in and they come in with symptoms in their, however old they are, late 40s, early 50s, and they might start HRT and then a few years later might need more. And that's because at the beginning their ovaries were still doing something and then they stopped producing, and so they're only producing estrogen from their fat cells in their body, so they might need more. And often people who don't have symptoms a few years later come in and they say, oh, I've got really bad vaginal dryness, or sex has become painful, or they get recurrent urinary tract infections, and that commonly happens a few years afterwards, and that can be very easily treated with vaginal moisturisers and vaginal oestrogen. But I think it's also important to say that if you went through okay and then a decade, 2 decades later, you start to develop symptoms, one needs to wonder, is that definitely related to your hormones or is there something else going on? And so I think that it's really important that you go and talk to your GP, especially if the hormone replacement therapy hasn't helped. Because HRT will only help if your symptoms are related to low levels of hormones.
Right. Well, look, thank you, Doctor. Always good to have you here. Thank you, Dibna. Thank you all for your calls and your messages on this. I hope you found it helpful. And of course, a huge thanks to Dr. Phillipa Kaye for joining us. Look, after the break, we're going to change topic. We're going to be asking you this.